Amy Acton takes the plunge into politics. Welcome to Columbus on the Record, a week into 2025, and we have an official candidate for governor of Ohio in the 2026 campaign. Dr. Amy Acton has filed to run for governor as a Democrat. Of course, Amy Acton rose to statewide fame and national attention in the spring of 2020 when she became the face of Ohio's fight against the coronavirus. She stood alongside Governor DeWine as the state closed businesses, schools, and government offices. For many, she was an empathetic, reassuring voice in the earliest days of the pandemic. For others, she became the face of government overreach and needless panic. Acton considered running for U.S. Senate in 2022, but decided against it. But this time, she's jumping in, saying Republicans at the State House have put Ohio on the wrong path. Joe Ingles, if she's been talked about as a candidate for a while now, but if she's going to run, this is really it, because we're getting further and further away from the pandemic and all the goodwill she developed then.
Exactly. I mean, she really needed to run now or never. And, you know, Amy Acton has a very unusual backstory as well. She was homeless for a short period of time in her past when she was growing up as a child. She's had, you know, some hard times, and she wants to speak to those, speak about the conditions that she sees that are holding Ohioans back.
Natalie, what are going to be her issues? She talked about, I think, healthcare was one, obviously. She's a physician.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how much that helps or hurts her. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic drew a lot of criticism the way it was handled in different states. In Ohio, I think as we get further and further from 2020, 5 years ago now, I think people are looking back at it more critically, the small business that's closing down, things like that. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not her response helped or hurt her and whether 2025 is far enough away.
Terry, she's a rookie. That has a disadvantage as she's inexperienced as a political candidate. The advantage is she doesn't have a voting record. So which wins out?
Well, not having a voting record can be a plus, but when you've never even run for the Bexley Board of Education or state representative, the learning curve in politics is steep. And if you want to run statewide, it's even tougher. And here's another angle. Some of the key people pushing her, both the last time and this time, are Sherrod Brown's people, which to me says Sherrod Brown's focused on U.S. Senate, not the option of running for governor. But
you know, somebody else didn't have any elected experience is now going to be the vice president of the United States. That was J.D. Vance.
I understand, and somebody might be the senior senator who's kind of limited, but some people can grasp politics quickly. And today's Toledo Blade, hardly a conservative publication, basically cited her naivete on some different things and how she wouldn't be the best candidate for the Democrats. So we'll see.
Herb, are Democrats excited to have her as a possible candidate for governor?
They're excited to have a candidate, but that's not the final candidate. But look, we've talked before, previous shows, about what's the Democratic bench? Who are the other names that you could mention? And if Sherrod's not interested, does Tim Ryan want to run? Does Allison Russo want to run? There just aren't very many people Democrats who seem on the face of it to be strong candidates. Is she a strong candidate? I think she has a lot of weaknesses. And I think her record on the pandemic is certainly going to be, if you imagine how the Republicans will attack her, she's the person who closed the businesses. She's the person who disrupted our lives. She's the person who forced us to wear masks. So I think it will be a negative thing there. But she also, I think, has, if she picks her issues correctly, and I hope she'll be comfortable in talking about primary and secondary education, tax reform, a whole variety of things like that. Last thing, I think, is that somehow for those who know her, they wonder if she's strong enough, that she have, you know, the spine of steel. And people are saying now who know her that she really is a different person than she was a year ago. She's not as touchy-feely. She's a little bit more driven. I don't know if that's the case or not.
Yeah, having guys with guns in your front lawn probably toughens your spine a little bit. Who else might run? This won't be just there'll be a primary in the Democratic side, even with someone who is popular among Democrats as Amy Acton is.
Yeah, and you mentioned Tim Ryan. That's another one that might run. We've heard Allison Russo mentioned as someone. She's the House Minority Leader, head of Democrats in the House. She might run. But here's the thing: the Democrats do not have the deep bench that the Republicans have, and I think that's really showing up not so much with the Senate and with the governor's office, but when you go down ticket. I mean, it's going to be difficult to get Democrats with name recognition.
Sherrod Brown, if he does because if he doesn't run for governor, which seems like if he's supported Acton in the past, I doubt they're going to go head to head. So let's just say he doesn't run for governor and he does run for Senate, tries to get a seat back, not his seat, but J.D. Vance's old seat. That's a pretty good top of the ticket combo, Amy Acton and Sherrod Brown, if she were to make it through the primary.
Yeah, presumably it might be a better year too for Democrats in 2026. It's a midterm election. The party in power never fares as well in those midterm elections. It would be an interesting top of the ticket, but the problems I think are going to be the fundraising. Like we mentioned, the Democrats don't have the deepest bench right now. And I think what we saw in the last election is that their campaigns focused a lot on things like reproductive rights, whereas a lot of Ohioans, for example, are really focused on other issues like the economy, things like that. So while that is an important issue, I just don't think it's resonating with Ohioans in the way they might want it to.
And don't forget the name of Jennifer Bruner, who's the last Democrat statewide office holder that's left in office. She's got a suit pending in Youngstown Federal Court that might allow her to stay on the bench and run because she's up in 26 and knows that it's going to be tough to get reelected on the Ohio Supreme Court. So there's names, but you can almost count them on one hand if you get that far.
As the year unfolds, if it looks like the Republicans are having problems in Washington or in Ohio and the economy's not doing that well, then there'll be a much more incentive for Democrats to come out of the woodwork and to try to run for office, and not just the top of the ticket, but filling out that ticket. But the other thing that we don't know right now is who will the Republican nominee be? And I would say today that any Democratic candidate starts off as the underdog, and particularly an underdog against somebody like Jon Husted. But of course, the rumors now have it that Husted may be appointed to the Senate and that some people are pushing Vivek Ramaswamy.
Let's get to those rumors.
Okay.
Ohio now only has one U.S. Senator, and Bernie Moreno has only been on the job for a week. That's because J.D. Vance resigned this week as he prepares to take the oath next week as vice president. Who succeeds him remains uncertain. Still no word from Governor DeWine on his choice to replace Vance for at least the next 2 years. Most of the speculation surrounds Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted. Husted wants to be governor, but faces a difficult primary if Donald Trump favorite and Ohio native Vivek Ramaswamy runs. Another leading contender would be former state Republican Party Chair Jane Timken for that U.S. Senate seat. Natalie Fahmy, what's the latest? We don't expect an announcement this week until, of course, today's Friday.
Right. We're not going to expect something this week. Governor Mike DeWine indicated that he will, quote, probably have a decision next week. So waiting to see what happens there. I think we've asked the governor enough times for him to be adequately annoyed with the whole entire press corps at this point. But he has stayed pretty tight-lipped about it, saying, I'm not going to say anything right now. Jon Husted, I asked him before the election, and he said, we'll see what happens in the election. If we win, we'll talk about it. Asked him this week, and he said, well, I'm weighing all my options. So it'll be interesting to see. It sounds like it's the lieutenant governors to turn down. Of course, if he is appointed, that will put into effect a whole other chain of appointments that have to happen. But he is definitely top of the list. Like you mentioned, Jane Timken is up there as well. Attorney General Dave Yost has no interest in it, so it'd be kind of shocking if it was him. But we'll have to see what the governor decides next week.
Terry, is this Jon Husted's decision? Word is he's still undecided.
To the credit of Herb, in early December, he first raised the question of Husted for the Senate, and I poo-pooed it and said it wasn't real. Then I checked some more and found out, and then you hear about the meetings down at Mar-a-Lago. All the other kind of signs are pointing pretty clearly that it is going to be Husted because, to a certain extent, the bird in the hand of being a U.S. Senator can be fairly appealing. And for Bernie Moreno's swearing in, both Tina, his wife, and John were there and got a sample of the D.C. environment. And D.C. in certain times can be very intoxicating and very appealing. So I think probably the governor's going to have to not just appoint the new senator, but appoint a new lieutenant governor.
But Joe Ingles, when you're governor, you run the show. I mean, you have to work with the legislature, of course. But when you're in the Senate, you're one of 100. You have to basically answer to your majority leader or minority leader if you're in the minority. And now, as a Republican, you've got to answer to Donald Trump. You're just a cog in a very big wheel.
You are, and there's another thing we need to remember is the relationship that Elon Musk has to Donald Trump. I mean, Elon Musk seems to be in Donald Trump's ear every single day, multiple times a day. And if you look at Husted's background, he has been working, he's over Jobs Ohio, works with them, and all these deals that we've been getting in Ohio. He's been working with banks and financial issues. These could be something that could be very helpful to some of the business interest in the Republican Party, and we don't know where Elon Musk might stand on that, or some of the others that are probably weighing in. But the fact is that might make him more of a potential candidate.
Herbert has to be. I mean, he was doing a lot of those things, laying the groundwork for a run for governor. Mike DeWine was putting him in front of economic development, put him in front of the Intel project and Jobs Ohio, and helping businesses during the COVID pandemic, and now.
Yeah, I think
it's almost like the rug is being pulled out from under him.
that's the way I see it. I think John Husted is eminently qualified to serve as governor. Whether you agree with him on issues or whatever, he has the experience, he's got the political skills. So what's happening now? And what we believe behind the scenes is that Donald Trump wants our next governor to be Vivek Ramaswamy. And so you have to get Husted out of the race for that. And so his consolation prize will be the U.S. Senate. But if you're a Democrat, if you're Amy Acton, if you're any Democrat thinking about running for governor, you'd much rather run against Ramaswamy than you would against John Husted.
What does this do for the calculation in 26? Because whoever DeWine appoints they fill 2 years until the next election, and then they're required to run again in 26, and then run again when the seat is up in 28. Natalie, is it more attractive for Sherrod Brown to run against him? What does it do for the other side? Run against John Husted?
I think for the other side, it gives them two opportunities to win that seat back. Again, we talked about that midterm election and how it might be beneficial for the Democratic Party, but now if someone like Sherrod Brown says, you know what, I have this opportunity in 2026, maybe people are going to be confused. Why am I voting for U.S. Senate again? What's going on? Didn't we just do this? People might be more motivated to get out to the polls depending on how the next 2 years go. So I think it could be favorable for the other side to have these two opportunities not too far away to try and gain some power back in the U.S. Senate from Ohio.
What happens if John Husted says, if it is his choice, and he says, no, I'm going to go for governor? Terry, who's next?
Well, I don't think the next is John Husted, because I think
So it won't be Jane Timken or Frank LaRose?
No. And there's a little category the governor said that's very important. He wants a proven winner. Well, John Husted has been on the statewide ballot 4 times successfully, and most of those other people have not been there or not been as successful. So I'm still betting, and I think that it's going to be Husted, and there'll be a new lieutenant governor, and it just adds more things to talk about in the coming year.
Joe, speculation on who, we're getting 2 steps down the road now, but lieutenant governor possibilities?
I've heard that Lydia Malik, I can't say her last name, Mahelnik. Did I say that right? I might have mispronounced that, but she's over budget.
Okay.
I've heard that she might stand a chance. She's someone who had an up-and-coming career, and she's pretty well known and tight, obviously, with Governor DeWine.
All right, we'll see. The Ohio legislature started its new legislative session on Monday. The only drama was whether lawmakers from southern Ohio would make it through a foot of snow to get to Columbus. There was no drama in the House or Senate chamber. None of the leadership fights or inter-party horse trading we've seen the past couple of years. Former Senate President Matt Huffman traded gavels and was unanimously elected House Speaker. His close ally, Rob McCauley, was chosen as the Senate President. Herb Asher, regardless of what you think about Matt Huffman, his politics or his practices, this is a pretty extraordinary move that he's done here, going from the top spot in one chamber immediately to the top spot in the other.
And done it very smoothly, without the kind of controversy or conflict you might have imagined. Matt Huffman really is a very talented, very smart, very strategic person. He plays hardball politics, but with a soft touch to it. He doesn't come across as a strident person. He has 8 years potentially as Speaker. I think he'll be the most prominent Republican in the state of Ohio. And he has a good friend in Macaulay as the Senate President.
Sorry.
And I've known Matt since he was city council president in Lima, Ohio. Part of it is he's very quick in terms of being able to respond, shift gears, and provide the leadership. And I think in the first 3 or 4 months, people are going to be surprised. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to get done and passed, including right or wrong on a higher ed bill that some people at universities might not like. Now, some other problems like K through 12 funding, the budget, that's going to be a whole different thing. But there's going to be a lot of things moved through in the first 2, 3, 4 months of the session.
You know, you hear stories, Natalie, that the House members don't get along with the Senate, even in their own party. I mean, does that evaporate now, or is there still going to be a little bit of tension between the chambers?
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily evaporates now. There's still 99 members in the House and 30-some members in the Senate. That's a lot of people to get along and agree on topics. We still have to see what type of leader Rob Macaulay is going to be. I mean, Matt Huffman had a pretty sturdy handle on his caucus in the Senate. Is that going to translate as easily to the House? There's a whole lot more personalities. There's different factions in the House. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there. I do, however, think there's just in general going to be more agreement between the chambers. So things, like Terry said, are just going to get through a lot quicker. So if it's something like clawing back some of those marijuana issues that the Senate passed with Democratic support, might get through in the House a little bit easier this General Assembly. So the infighting might not be as prominent, but I don't think it can ever go away when you have bodies that big.
So where do Democrats land here, Joe? They had a smidgen of power when they helped elect Larry Householder, then helped elect Jason Stevens. There's no smidgen anymore.
Yeah, there's no smidgen of power here, and it remains to be seen what's going to happen with the Democrats. But if there is any infighting, once again, that opens the door to the Democrats coming in. Plus, a lot of things that the lawmakers are going to be looking at, a lot of the issues they're going to be going into the budget with, those are issues that Democrats have been supportive of. You look at things like children's health issues, education, things like that. There might be some more common ground than what we think.
They have veto-proof majorities, Republicans do right now. And of course, they have a Republican governor. Where does Matt Huffman and Rob Macaulay sit with Governor DeWine?
Well, they don't agree on all issues all the time, but in general, if you look at governors' budgets, ultimately 98.5% all gets adopted. So they'll work it out. The only trouble in this budget cycle, and there are dark clouds looming, is the amount of money they've got. The COVID money's not only gone, but there's some warning signs that sales tax and income tax revenue might start shrinking up. So it's tough to do a budget 30 months ahead and predict all the economic factors.
We put in term limits, Herb. Vern Reif served as House Speaker for 20 years. This was made possible because of term limits.
That's right.
I mean, you could, in 8 years, does Matt Huffman goes back and serves as House Speaker?
You're saying, oh, no, does he go back in 8 years
Yeah.
and serve
Serve
as
as Senate President. Yeah, Senate
no.
President, yeah.
No, we've had actually a couple of legislators who have, got to 32 years since we've had term limits. So,
Not at the top spot, though.
no, not at the top. Oh,
Go
yeah,
from
yeah.
House Speaker, Senate President to House Speaker back to Senate
Yeah, no,
President.
look, I think, again, Matt Huffman is so talented. I think he will make sure that the House of Representatives and the Republican caucus don't go too far off the rails. He'll do a good job, I think, in making sure that the extremely wacko fringe doesn't dominate the public discussion of what the legislature is doing. He's a good conservative, and he has a number of issues he wants to pursue. I think he will dominate the agenda very effectively.
But Terry, he was on the wrong side on the marijuana issue. Matt Huffman was. He was also on the wrong side on the abortion rights issue. So, I mean, those both passed, but close, 55 to 60% of the vote. But he was staunch opponents to both of those. So,
But he adjusts and he shifts gears. And again, that background in Lima is a mini urban area. So he understands something, I think, pretty well of the diversity of Ohio, and that you like to get everything you want, but he adjusts, adapts accordingly. And also in the legislature, you always have each week maybe one or two tough issues when they're in session, but you have to adjust, turn the page, keep moving, and he understands that process.
All right. Many of those warehouse-looking buildings popping up all around central Ohio are not warehouses at all. They are data centers, warehouse-sized buildings filled with computers. And those computers are processing, storing, and transferring massive amounts of data. Ohio has some 170 of these data centers, fourth most in the country. Ohio has worked hard to attract these facilities, offering tax breaks and other incentives, but they come with a cost. They absorb farmland. They only employ a handful of people, and they need a lot of energy, so much so that utilities like AEP will have to make big improvements to the grid of high-tension wires and transfer stations around the state. The estimated cost to improve the grid could approach $5 billion. The question now is who's going to pay for it, the data centers or other ratepayers? Terry Casey, is this data center boom a good thing for the state of Ohio?
The correct answer is yes and no. And there's clearly right now a hell of a battle going on in business interest. Some data business people that want it all built and spread among all ratepayers, and then a lot of other ratepayers, including people that own a lot of commercial real estate, businesses, factories, et cetera, plus homeowners who don't want to necessarily fork over the billions of costs. But here's another little wrinkle. Technologically, coming in the next 5 to 10 years will be the ability of these operations to maybe have their own in-house natural gas generation of electricity, or the technology might be there for mini nuclear plants to supply it. So the question is, how much do you build in generating and transmission, and does the technology change in how electric's generated for the future?
What are the state is offering a lot of incentives to these data centers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what's the strategy, Joe?
Well, there's not a lot of jobs with these data centers. So it's obviously not because there's going to be a lot of jobs, but there is tax revenue that comes in. Plus, this is an emerging technology. It's something that could position Ohio well in the future. To Terry's comment about, having potential new facilities come in with it's shortly thereafter with their own utilities. I mean, we heard that with the electric cars, and that's been 20 years that we've been hearing that they're going to, and it really hasn't materialized. So
now, like AEP is asking these data centers to put the money up front to help expand the grid, which kind of makes sense because they're afraid they're going to, expend all this money to expand the grid, then the data center pulls out.
Yeah, the energy conversation in Ohio was really interesting in general. Last General Assembly, there was like a bicameral, bi-state meeting. Lawmakers from Pennsylvania came to Ohio. Each chamber met with them. It was this big meeting about Ohio and what the future of energy in Ohio looks like. And I think the big thing that a lot of utilities are warning against and lawmakers are now trying to address is this looming energy cliff that they're worried about. Will Ohio start having rolling brownouts, blackouts, things like that? So the energy conversation is a lot bigger, and I think the concern is that some of these projects are going to take up too much energy that Ohio can handle right now because we haven't addressed energy issues since House Bill 6.
Herb, I don't see any protests. It's taking up farmland. I don't see any protests like we're seeing at the solar farms, and these high-tension poles are pretty tall, windmills and wind farms, but I don't see any protests there.
Yeah, nobody protecting the birds or the. But Terry's point, if they don't come up with new ways of generating electricity, then we'll have to rely upon the traditional notion of improvement in the grid, and then you get back to the question: who's going to pay for it? And I think in some way, ratepayers are going to pay for it, but the question becomes how. Are you going to front load all these costs? I haven't heard anybody talk yet about putting bond issues on the ballot to help generate revenue, to help the companies do these upgrades. And then how would you pay for the bonds? There'd be a surcharge on your energy bill, but that surcharge might be less than a direct increase in your rate paying.
Well, Google's market value is $2.4 trillion. Facebook's market value, I think, is Amazon is $2.3 trillion, and Facebook, Meta, is like $1.3 trillion. So there's some money there.
Yeah.
But if you're a big $1 trillion company and you can get the little people in Ohio to float the 30-year obligation and risk, that's a great deal.
Yeah, it is a good
for
deal.
them.
Let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. And Terry Casey, you're up first.
We're going to watch J.D. Vance with interest because uniquely Ohio, for its first time in history, might actually have 3 U.S. senators because J.D. Vance will be president of the Senate, potentially a tiebreaker, plus our other 2 senators. So what role does he have? Does having a 3rd senator, is it a benefit to Ohio? How does it work out?
We'll see. Herb.
We hear a lot about Ohio State football coaches, their bonuses. We've heard the public statement about it's a $20 million team. I wonder if in the future we're going to see greater openness throughout the country in terms of what football programs are spending to achieve the elite status they want, and especially what Texas and Texas A&M are doing.
All right, Joe.
Former Ohio Senate Minority Leader Ben Espy passed away. He was also very instrumental in Columbus politics. He started a lot of programs, broke a lot of color barriers, a very interesting man, and condolences to his friends and family. And also, if you don't know who he is, read about him because he's interesting.
Yeah, great guy. Natalie.
Stay tuned for 2025, a new U.S. Senator, possibly a new Lieutenant Governor. The first 6 months at the legislature, we're going to have a multi-billion state budget passing. Lots of legislation that was stalled the past 2 years is likely going to get through, so there's going to be a whole lot going on.
Yes, we'll be with it all the way. Google did offer $1 million to help improve the electric grid this week, so not bad. It's going to cost $5 billion, and they're a huge company, as we said, but it's a start. Anyway, that is Columbus on the Record for this week. Please continue the conversation on Facebook, and you can watch us anytime on your time. Like, say, if you miss us to watch a college football semifinal, you can catch up and you can watch us at our website, wosu.org/COTR, on YouTube, and also the PBS video app. For our crew and panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.